This declaration does not germinate from the Republic, but it is cleverly disguised act of war against the democracy from within the democracy. It is hostile in nature, and when juxtaposed with the peaceful and loving decree of true sovereign delegates on the Republic, properly served upon the Commander-in-Chief, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Supreme Court, this trap and declaration by the guardian elders renders one spiritually and politically out of covenant. Also, in the discipline of American law, there is no historical precedent or jurisprudence of guardian elders as supreme lawmakers. This document also fails due process by serving the proper parties, as it names and targets fictitious governors of the composite states. At this point, there are extensive definitions given for the words within the trap document, which I will not go into. After that, the document continues. Other false premises exist with regard to this document, namely the purpose to restore the Republic. It is a fact that the Republic already exists and is recognized by the private oaths taken by the de facto President and Supreme Court justices. Then there's more definitions given. The Guardians have signed in the capacity of U.S. persons and federal, municipal, corporation employees as defined below. The statutes defining persons in the United States, etc., are listed. And now the committee gets to the meat of the truth. The fact that although we in America have been lied to deliberately and taught just the opposite, the Constitution does not and never did apply to us. It was written for one purpose only, to limit the powers of and to protect the people from the federal government, which was created for very specific and limited duties which the individual nation-states had to do as a collective. It was never intended to govern the people, as we are a part of the Republic of the self-governed and not under the jurisdiction of a corporate entity in Washington, D.C. The people had already created the Articles of Confederation, which, contrary to Turner's twisted version of historical interpretation, have never been rescinded, revoked, overturned, or revised, and are still in place today. The document goes on to quote the Articles of Confederation, Article 1, Article 2, specifically, which states each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right, which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. I'm not going to read all of that because we are short on time. If you would like to know exactly what the Articles of Confederation say and the law that you truly are still under, please Google it or email me, and I'll be happy to send you a copy. Also, there is a failure to recognize the jurisprudence of electing delegates to the several states. The Declaration addresses, thereby acknowledging the existence of 50 de facto governors who are fictitious in nature. By the recorded testimony of James David and Kelly Russell, the unnecessary orders issued within this document were included as a mere salesmanship to cast a wider net to capture men and women's interest. The following quotation is attributed to Thomas Schultz, recorded in conference, withheld February 4th, 2010. Kelly Russell, James David, and Thomas Schultz and Tim Turner. I quote here, "What we are selling on the airwaves is a remedy, people. Jump onto the remedy or quit bitching about it." This was at the 20-minute 36 mark, or 20.36-minute mark on the recording. At the 20.39 mark, Thomas said, part of the sales technique was that this was a military suggestion. The consequences to the Republic and the signers of the Declaration are as follows. Possible incarceration of the signers, loss of property, loss of liberty, loss of life, death of ones who sign his or her signatures, enactment of martial law to encumber and enslave all men, women, and children of the Republic. Recommendation of the committee. Since the preponderance of evidence cited in this investigative report finds that the language of the Restore America Plan, the Restore America Crusade, and the unanimous declaration renders the documents repugnant to the Constitution of the United States of America as amended 1791, Anno Domino, and is attempted hostile takeover of the municipal corporation from within the municipal corporation, the political will of the originators, signers, and propagandists is that of a beneficiary of the municipal corporation engaged in a seditious act, therefore belligerents. It is the recommendation of this committee that the men and women on the Republic take actions to decree their formal opposition, non-association, and indictment on this conduct and document for seditious and injurious acts against real men and women, and to protect the Republic by issuing notice to anyone involved in such seditious acts that they will be subject to arrest and prosecution on the charge of treason and any other and all other related charges of offenses against the real men and women on the land. Excuse me just a moment. It is the recommendation of this committee that the men and women on the Republic take actions to decree their formal opposition. Or did I read that part already? I'm sorry, my granddaughter is in here interrupting. This deceit has negatively impacted participation in conference calls, training calls, and formation and development of local self-governed assemblies and colored all true sovereigns in a negative public light. Therefore, as a countermeasure and notice to the world, it seems imperative that, as Speaker for the delegates of the several states, the Secretary communicate through electronic media as the most efficient and expedient method of defeating any evil attempts to associate TRAP with the Republic, and decree the position of the delegates and problems realized by associating with TRAP. For the safety of all peaceful men and women, a high-profile notice seems appropriate to ensure guard against an underhanded sweep and broad-brush attempt to associate TRAP with the Republic. Therefore, we call upon the Secretary to take preemptive countermeasures against such attempts. End of document. It's now well known that the declarations were delivered anyway, with no regard to the wishes of the assemblies. What many did not know is that the assemblies which had been taken over by RAP had already claimed their inherent rights to the Republic. That did not stop Turner from claiming he, and only he, had re-inhabited our Republic. I also have in my possession a document that proves he had already declared himself president on September 20th, 2010, and the so-called elections did not take place until September 23rd, 2010, in which there was but one candidate, himself. Once Sam Kennedy was gotten rid of, Turner needed to get rid of three more: Tom Schultz, Regan Reedy, and Sam Davis. Sam Davis eventually made the decision to leave on his own after hearing from Nathan Peachy that the whole thing was all about the money and nothing but the money. But the others had to be taken out differently. I'm sure all you out there who were in the organization back then can remember the claims that came from Turner in regard to Tom Schultz. He claimed they'd gotten rid of him because he had met with the Queen and took a deal and sold out the Republic. There were a number of claims made in the usual butter wouldn't melt in his mouth Christian fakery to make it sound like it pained him to have to say such nasty things about both Schultz and Reedy. Let's hear what Mr. Reedy had to say in his own words about what was really taking place behind closed doors.
With 19, correct?
Yes.
But the way these public offices got put out there is we had a meeting. It was referred to as an executive meeting. And this executive meeting was supposed to have been about doing a charter for the Treasury. Well, Tim came up with doing these public offices because he had a vision from God, or I don't know exactly how he put it. And the fact that some of these people in foreign countries he'd been talking to wanted this provisional government put up before they would put forth massive amounts of gold and funding. I was in talks with those folks also for about 6 weeks. Never once did that subject come up, so I don't know how that came about. But when we had this committee meeting, we agreed to do the appointments for these offices in the event the de facto government folded their cards and they would be in place. Our understanding at that meeting was that these offices was never supposed to have been made public. A few days after that meeting, it came out that the grand juries was then being asked to vote on these public offices. As soon as that started out, Tom and I got calls from folks that we get intel from. Tom was called to an emergency meeting that he was there almost 10 days. I think he was there 10 days. And Tom tried every way in the world to get this not to happen because these folks definitely didn't want this to happen. So that's the reason Tom was so forceful on the phone about this, and he come out looking like the bad guy when all he was trying to do was keep people out of jail. It's come down to I continue to try to be a peacemaker between. First it was Tim and Sam Kennedy, and then it was Tim and Sam Davis, and then it was Tim and Tom. And, it gets to the point where you kind of see a pattern here. With these public offices coming out publicly and the fact that it was publicly made known that Tim was negotiating with 82 countries. Now, of course, Tim says that he was negotiating with private parties, but that's not how it was put out in the public, and that's how it was not perceived. But when you're talking to presumably the elders of China, you are talking to the government of China. Period. If that so is the case. But long story short, these public offices was never supposed to have been made public, and they were, and it caused a great deal of problems for myself and Tom dealing with the alphabet soup. And we're
Remember how Turner claimed over and over the funders had insisted on interim government and seats of office? Obviously, that was a bit of a stretch of the truth, as it turns out.
And so we had an executive committee call about 3 weeks ago. An executive committee, all those, not all of them, most of those that was appointed to those offices resigned from those offices. And then we voted that we would negate these public offices. And it was agreed. Tim was supposed to correct that and corrected the paperwork that gets sent off to UPU and United Nations and whoever else. I do not know if that was ever done. But it still remains that, and now the simple cure for that is come out with more de facto offices, simply change the name of president to prime minister or whatever, which does not negate the problem.
If you'll recall, I shared a document on my blog called the Security Council and a training audio course to go with it months ago, which outlined the top-down absolute dictatorship that Turner actually intended to put in place. The training audio was done by Nathan Peachy. Here is something Regan has to say we are all too familiar with now.
And then there was a meeting a few days ago in Alabama where some of the Alabama grand juries, Florida and some others, had a meeting with Sheriff Mack, and the statements was made there that there was no longer a Restore America plan. It was now the Restored Republics of the United States of America, and that myself, Tom, and a bunch of others was no longer a part of any of the Restore America plan or any of this other thing. And the reason being was the explanation those people down there gave was that since we voted on the executive committee to do away with these public offices, and the fact that many of the folks resigned from those offices, that we had voluntarily removed ourselves from the Restore America plan and or the Restored Republic. That's not putting words in folks' mouth. That was what was said down at the meeting, face to face, not with myself, but with folks we had down there that reported back to us. So we now come to a dilemma where I have no idea where this is supposed to be going as far as Tim's concerned. Like I say, he doesn't keep